My name is Wendy Potomsky and I'm the managing partner and owner of Retake Furniture Rentals. Retake is once again a proud supporter of the Canadian Film Festival and is working to contribute to the Canadian film and TV industry by making it an easy and sustainable place to do business. Retake provides sustainable short and long-term furniture rental options to meet production schedules and product needs. Retake also understands the importance of set design and the dynamic nature of the film and TV industry, which is why we created a company to specifically support Canadian filmmakers. Retake can assist you in setting up your production office with sustainable alternatives to keep your team working safely as we all head back to work. We use sustainable approaches to minimize product going to landfill, which means any product supplied by Retake is helping to support the circular economy. Our in-house upholstery services can tailor our product to meet your set design requirements and match your color schemes. Contact us to discuss your office furniture needs. Our goal is to help you get back to work as safely and efficiently as possible. Stay safe, everyone, and enjoy the films and shorts at this year's Canadian Film Festival.
Celebrate Canadian filmmakers on Super Channel Fuse with an exclusive homegrown event.
I'm ready.
Go.
The Canadian Film Fest, presented by Super Channel, brings this year's festival into your home for a second year as a virtual experience.
Goodbye.
Every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night until April 18th. Enjoy the premieres of indie films and shorts from critically acclaimed and up-and-coming Canadian producers and directors.
And this is where the donkey starts talking.
Immerse yourself in this inspiring and spirited event, both on air and online, with live Facebook Q&A sessions that follow the films.
Makes sense.
Start it.
Experience the Canadian Film Fest, proudly presented by Super Channel.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Canadian Film Festival. Thanks for joining us for a Q&A with our filmmakers of the evening. My name is Mark Yashodi. I'm one of the programmers for the festival.
And my name is Laura Good, also one of the programmers for the festival. Amara and I will be co-moderating the Q&A this evening.
Tonight's feature film was White Elephant, and we're going to be joined by the filmmaking team in a little bit. But before that, we're going to talk about the short film that preceded it, The Sky's Blue KALTHOUM. And we're lucky to have the team here with us today, starting with the writer and director, Durrani Urgesa. Oh, I think, Durrani, you're muted.
Classic Zoom mistake. But
Classic.
hi, everyone. My name is Durrani Urgesa. Like Amar said, I'm the writer and director of The Sky's Blue KALTHOUM. Joining me today, I have my amazing producer, partner in crime, Nikita Adani. We're also joined by actor Kyra D'Souza. And then we're joined by the incredible lead actress, Rosina Ferretti.
So why don't you start by telling us, about the genesis of the project? How did it come together?
Absolutely. So the film is actually based on real events. While working on another project with a crew member, we were, discussing, childhood stories, things from our past that, really shaped us and stayed with us. And one of my close friends was able to share a moment from her childhood where the events at the soccer field actually happened to her in real life. And she ended up, sharing that story with such humility and humor. And I just was marveled at how something that could be so traumatic, so big, could just be told through such a humorous and kind of reflective lens. And, we ended up talking about the story more and developing it a little bit further. And she, gave me the ability to write it out and kind of turned it into a more tangible project. And she ended up serving as the film's first assistant director. Her name is Phil Sonali. And her story was just so incredibly touching. I decided to, kind of run with it and turn it into this short film.
That's incredible. I'd love to also expand that question from the genesis, starting with you, Durrani, and your collaborator, to everyone else who's here with us in the room. Could you tell us a little bit about what drew you to this project and how and at what stage you became involved? For the producer and cast that are here, Nikita, Kyra, and Rosina.
Yeah, absolutely. So the project was actually made while we were third-year students at Humber College. And so Humber College officially produced the project. And we go through a script selection process where about 7 or 8 scripts get selected. And, you kind of cut down until you narrow it down to 4 or 5. And there were a couple stories there. And of course, Durrani's script was one of them. And from the beginning, I absolutely loved the story. I mean, it's such a beautiful story inside and out. And just as someone who's not originally from Canada, living in Canada myself, just kind of seeing the conflicting lessons that you receive from your family and the way that, you know, you feel you need to behave to fit in with your friends. It's just something that resonated with me so much. And it was just, I just thought it was a beautiful story. And I just knew that I wanted to help make it. And so, yeah, I got involved pretty quickly early on. And then Durrani and I went through the process. So we pretty much went through the process of like coming up with a pitch deck and a pitch package and sending that into Humber. Then they go through and then they were picked out of, I believe, we had about, I think, 15 scripts, and then we had 7 or 8 that were selected. And so The Sky is Blue was one of those. And then we had 5, I think, different casting calls. Durrani, just correct me if I'm right. I can't remember. We
5.
did so many. Yeah. And we found the amazing Kyra and Rosina, and we're so happy. And the rest of our amazing cast who aren't here today, but are watching from their homes, I'm sure.
Yes.
Yeah, for the actors, I'd love for you guys to talk a little bit about, you know, what was that process like, and what were your impressions when you first encountered the script and your characters?
Rosina, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, it started with the script for me. I was just, you know, I was looking for things to audition for. I was fresh out of university, out of a conservatory, and I auditioned for this project, and the script was really, really beautiful. Sorry, I'm not looking at the screen properly where I'm supposed to now. Yeah, like the script was really beautiful. It was about, you know, an East African girl, and that was already really refreshing. And the story about, you know, how she finds herself and going through bullying, you know, I think we can all could relate to that. And you know, sticking to what's important to her, it really showed who she was. And I just thought it was such a beautiful story. And then like the process of actually working on it was even more amazing. Like everyone was so like amazing. Everyone was so professional, and it was just amazing to work with everyone.
So much like Rosina, I was fresh out of university. My agent actually sent me to audition for the wrong role. I auditioned for Mo. And when I got there, Durrani actually told me, she was like, actually, I'd like you to read something else. And I'm really glad she did. Working on the film was amazing. The story really resonated with me because I was bullied in middle school. So I had, you know, like I understood Kalthoum's story, and it's very different when you're the child of immigrant parents, I think. They come from a whole different background, and I feel like my parents knew exactly how to kind of guide me through what I was going through.
That dichotomy is actually what's so interesting in the film, where, you know, her mom is telling her that you should fight back, you know, you shouldn't forgive them. And in fact, what she ends up doing in reality is reacting with kindness. So Durrani, could you talk a little bit about sort of why you wanted to look at that, and the specific kind of relationship between her and her mom that you wanted to express?
Absolutely. I think empathy was a really big thing that I wanted to kind of like touch on through this piece. And the character of Kalthoum, she has so much of it. She's kind of a bleeding heart, if you will. And I think a lot of people see that as a really big vulnerability and sees that as a sign of weakness. And I think in the film, several characters take advantage of Kalthoum's kindness, and they definitely mistake it for a form of weakness. And when she receives that, you know, really harsh lesson from her mother about, you know, you can only love yourself. If people push you, you got to push them back, which, you know, a lot of parents can share that same rhetoric with their children. And it's a form of like, this is how you survive in a world that is incredibly brutal. Now, like, you know, it seems more than ever. And so even with my own mother, who, you know, actually plays the mother in the movie, my mom was the lead actress in the film. And she, you know, raised me on that same kind of logic. And I don't look back on that with like bitterness or, you know, you've misled me, but you were trying to guard me and arm me for a world that would not always return the kindness that I have to share, or others like me have to share. And so at the end of the film, when we see Kalthoum make that decision for herself, she doesn't necessarily forgive the character of Hakeem. She offers him this act of, you know, here, let me offer you a hand and extend this kindness to you in a way that you did not for me. And so I don't see it as a sign of weakness to do that. I see it as a sign of empathy. Yeah.
And I think for me as well, that's the crux of what I responded to in the film, was that it was so refreshing and so unexpected that you see your lead character come to this sense of self through an act of empathy. And it's just so subversive, but it also still honors the relationship with her mother. Like, it's very clear that there's so much love and respect there, but that she's going to find her own way. And I think, and as a woman particularly, it felt like a very feminist film, even though it's not explicitly about gender. I just thought those female relationships really came through.
Absolutely.
And
I
speaking
did
of
study women's studies, so that I'm sure you picked up on something there.
picking up some subtext,
Yeah.
we do have an audience question I wanted to throw to from Gabby in our audience, who said that she noticed that this is a student film and is wondering, how did you navigate the safety restrictions that possibly came up in pre-production with the scene being solely on the goalpost? Could you speak to that?
That's a super specific question. It sounds like
That's a producer question. Sounds
Yeah.
like an
Go for it,
inspiring
Nikita.
producer.
We've got an
That's
answer.
actually, yeah, oh my goodness, we have an answer. That's actually really funny. That was probably one of the biggest challenges in pre-production that we had to tackle. We went through a couple different, versions of it. And so there were times when we weren't even sure if we were able to actually film the scene on a goalpost. And then eventually we were able to figure out a way to go ahead with filming it safely on the goalpost. And we had a stunt coordinator, Scott Milton, who was on set with us. He ran the cast through the safety protocols, how to get up on the goalpost, how to get off the goalpost. There's obviously camera tricks involved here and there, a little bit. Yeah, and a lot of Rosina's very real emotions that showed, which worked out really great. But so we had about, I think, 4 feet thick safety mats underneath the goalpost in case anyone fell down on them. And then they were all just sitting there. Scott was on the side, and that's pretty much it, I guess. But
I felt very safe.
Yeah.
I felt very safe. Even at the beginning, like before we even went into production, like it was a whole thing. Like, are you sure you're gonna be okay with this? And I was like, yeah. Like, I was a little bit worried, but then as soon as we actually went to go do it, it was completely fine. It was not even like how I was like pent up to be worrying about it. It was not worrisome at all. Like they said, there was a stunt coordinator, and there's like a ladder underneath me, and practiced a bunch of times. It was more than safe. I felt totally safe. So.
And we've seen the behind the scenes photos. So
Yeah.
I saw how official your guys' setups were and everything. So it all looked really really thoroughly thought out. We're running out of time, but I just wanted to really quickly, the last thing I wanted to talk about was the production design of the film. One of the things that I really loved about it was just the choices of color. I love her blue jacket and the way it contrasts against this huge green field. And even with what happens at the end, I would love for you, Durrani, to talk a little bit about sort of what was your visual approach, and I'd love to even hear about sort of your cinematic influences and sort of what are the films and filmmakers that you sort of looked at for this.
Absolutely. This is actually the perfect opportunity for me to highlight 2 of my amazing collaborators, our production designer, Ali Karpus, and our director of photography, Jean-Luc Monez. Without the 2 of them, this film would definitely not look as visually beautiful as it currently does. So, in terms of the production design, the majority of the film did take place outside, and I knew that, green would be like the predominant color we were working with on this massive hill, this amazing location that we were able to scout. And so when we were inside in the home, I wanted that space to be very intentional and to be a reflection of the really like colorful and dynamic homes and spaces that I grew up in my cultural background. I'm Oromo. We are an ethnic group from Ethiopia, and there's just so much like color and richness and texture there. And so I wanted to translate that into our set. And what Ali was able to do was like really build this beautiful color palette. I knew that like blue and teal, and I see blue as a really hopeful color. I know blue can be such a dynamic color in terms of, it's sad, it's happy, it's, blue sky, or, Blue Monday, if that's a thing. I'm not sure if it is, maybe I made it up. And so blue is such a dynamic color. And even though this film has really sad, and quite dark moments, there are some moments where the light really opens up, especially at the end of the film when Rosina has that really triumphant moment. And to touch on, the kind of cinematic influences, with my director of photography, we spent a lot of time kind of mulling over the dynamics of the climbing sequence, and especially of that final climb where Rosina has her amazing moment at the top of the goalpost. And that kind of inverted shot we see where she's pulling herself up and straining, that was definitely a labor of love and an amazing shot, engineered by the director of photography and our grip and gaffer team. And so, yeah, we were just really inspired by the set that we were able to find, and using that outdoor space as like widely as we could. We wanted it to feel claustrophobic, like she's kind of being circled by wolves, but in the end, when we see that tight shot on her face, it's really kind of a full circle moment. She's in her own world,
So unfortunately, we are out of time, but I want to thank you all for joining us. Thank you for sharing your film with us.
Thank you.
Everyone else, stick around. We'll be right back with the team from White Elephant.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Hi, welcome back to our Q&A. I think many of you out there today made the decision to watch White Elephant instead of Godzilla vs. Kong, and I commend you for that. I assure you, White Elephant is a much more interesting film, and I say that as a very big Godzilla fan myself. And so to talk about it, we're joined today by the team, and I want to start by introducing the writer-director, Andrew Chung.
Hello. Yeah, we're here with the lead, Zareen Bushra, who plays Pooja, Gurleen Singh, who plays Manpreet, and Dalmika Hapuarachi, who plays Amit.
So, we'll start the way we always start these things, which is, Andrew, why don't you tell us a little bit about how the project came together? What was the inspiration for it?
Well, it was actually part of an art exhibition in Markham for the Varley Art Gallery, and the exhibition's theme was for the artists to tackle communities that were not necessarily their own. So I chose the South Asian community, mostly because I felt like there was a lot of adjacency with Chinese culture. I'm Chinese, and my parents are also from India, so I was very familiar with Indian culture. And I grew up in Scarborough and Markham, where the film takes place, and there was a lot of Indians I grew up around. So I had a lot of Indian friends, Indo-Canadian friends who were born and raised in Canada in the same neighborhoods that I grew up in. So I thought that was a community that I could authentically portray. So once I decided on that, I based a lot of the experiences that Pooja has on my own experiences growing up in Scarborough and Markham. So a lot of this stuff is based on real experiences, like literally some of the stories that Amit tells in the film are like real stories. That was a real story that happened in my high school. And my best friend told us that story, and we were like, are you bullshitting us right now, or is this a real story? But it was a real story. Like, there was people who backed it up, but yeah. So I mean, the biggest thing I wanted to explore in the film thematically was just exploring the idea of cultural identity in a majority minority neighborhood, but at the same time growing up in a white dominant culture, and trying to, that coming of age story, but recontextualizing it in that type of scenario where you are not only dealing with your adolescent identity, but as well as your cultural identity. So layering that on top of you know, the usual adolescent identity crises films that you see in teenage dramas and that sort of thing. What additional complexity would that add to the you know, the teenage drama genre? But yeah, that was my initial inspiration.
What I think is so unique about the film compared to other BIPOC coming of age stories is it's sort of self-reflexive in a way, right? The way that it's thinking about how media plays into these contexts of representation, right? Because the opening of the film is Pooja imagining herself in that scene from Romeo plus Juliet. You know, she mimics that poster outside. The opening credits are her watching a bunch of TV, right? So that's what I really loved about it. And I would love now for, you know, the cast, for you guys to talk about sort of how you came to the film and what that process was like. Why don't we start with Pooja? I mean, sorry, Zareen.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's kind of like seeing your own story in the script, right? Because I think it's a similar experience that most brown girls had when they were growing up in high school. My experience wasn't as intense as Pooja's, but I definitely saw the script and reflected immediately and recognized those scenarios immediately, because I grew up consuming a lot of media that made me want to be different than who I was. And a lot of the reactions that Pooja has, a lot of wants and desires that she has, definitely brought me back to who I was in high school. And it was a bit jarring at times, because it's kind of a mindset that once you move past, you don't really want to think about anymore. You don't want to think about like, oh, I was that person. And then when you're doing the film, you have to become that person again. And it's at sometimes you're like, oh, I hate this character, because it's really just that, like, I hate who I used to be when I thought this way. But it's also I just identified with her so much because I understood where she was coming from. And at times I thought she was so annoying, but it was like, I was also that annoying. And it's just, I guess, recognizing that so many of us went through the same thing, and having that portrayed on screen, and knowing that it was going to be portrayed on screen, was really exciting for me.
And Gurleen, what was it like for you reading the script and encountering your character for the first time?
Well, for me, when I first read Manpreet's role, like right off the bat, I was like, this is literally me. Like, I had so many similarities with Manpreet that I was like, whoa, like, this is me. Like, this is my character. Like, she has a very hard head, if that makes sense. She's very passionate, and she's very protective of her friends. And you can see in the film that she would get annoyed with Pooja, but she would also be there for her, and she would like go with her and like to like the movies and stuff, and just be there for her. And I feel like that was a lot of me when I was in high school. Like, I used to be the person who would be there for someone, and like no one would really be there for me. So I feel like Manpreet was kind of like on her own, and she also dealt with like a lot of identity issues. And I feel like for me, that, as I was gonna call you Pooja, as Zareen said, how like back then in like the schools, how sorry, I'm like blanking, I don't know what I was supposed to say, how like it's different, and you have to like go back into like that high school mindset. And so I really related to Manpreet, and that's how I got to the role.
Yeah, and it's, you know, you guys are talking about how sort of Zareen, especially, you're talking about sort of how annoying you thought the character was, but it also feels, you know, and to Andrew's credit, it also feels like a very honest portrayal of high school. Like, it doesn't, you know, so often we see these films with like 40-year-olds is what it seems like, playing high school characters, but you know, the dialogue and there's sort of the craziness of the characters totally matches that. Dalmika, what about you? What was it like reading the script?
Reading the script for the first time was really amazing, because I didn't see a character like this, you know, come across my table before, you know. So I was definitely excited and like kind of ecstatic to begin, you know, this audition process. You know, I definitely thought it was going to be different than the others, and especially because it was my like second ever audition. But yeah, you know, I remember practicing a lot in front of the camera, you know, taking like multiple takes, you know, trying to be this character, because I definitely found a lot of similarities between Ahmed and me, just like everyone else said. And I think yeah, just before I went into my first audition, I told myself like I am Ahmed, and I kind of like went into the audition room thinking I was Ahmed, but like I was still me, like, you know, so that I don't go into, you know, the audition to saying like, yo, you know, what's up, kind of thing, you know. But yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think from there, yeah, you know, it was a smooth ride. And I think the moment I started to like, you know, I think the moment the camera was on me, I just acted like, you know, myself in 8th grade, basically, and that was Ahmed, you know. And yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities between us two, and like I used to be definitely like him in a way in grade 8, and I used to make up stories to kind of like, you know, seem cool, things like that, you know. And I wanted to fit into a certain like, you know, society kind of thing, you know, like whether it's like the, you know, the cool white kids or the cool black kids, like I wanted to fit somewhere. So I would like try like a lot of different, you know, things. I think that we all did, you know, kind of thing. Yeah.
That's really cool to hear how much each of you had such personal resonance with each of your characters on the casting side, as well as on the writing direction side with Andrew. And you know, that's definitely something that came across to us and that we talked a lot about in the programming room was how well the film articulates that straddling of cultures and the concept of code switching and that like cultural fluidity and feeling like you have to change your behavior or speech patterns to fit in with different groups. And so I wanted to get everyone to speak to that, but I feel like you've touched on it pretty holistically already, which is pretty cool. But I'd also love to speak to the fact that the film is so naturalistic in its tone, and also and especially in its dialogue. And I wanted to ask you, Andrew, how you approach that from a writer's perspective, and if there was any improvisation, because it is so fluid. It almost seemed as though you might have left some room for your actors to interpret, or was it just that well written? Can you fill us in?
I mean, yeah, people have said that before, but it was all written. There was nothing really that was improvised. But I will say that I collaborated with the actors quite a bit in terms of the dialogue itself. So, I mean, I'm always working with the actors to ensure that it comes out naturally. So I think in that respect, there is that sort of improvisational like feel to it, right? When you allow the actors to kind of have the input in what they're saying, it will, you know, come out that way. So we did that in like the table reads and the rehearsals. So I would adjust the script based on our discussions. But at the end of the day, when we were filming on set, that was what was on the page at the time. So yeah.
And you guys are, you know, you guys are emerging actors. You're all still relatively early on in your careers, and I was really curious about sort of, you know, thinking about how actors work and thinking about how you guys might have worked with Andrew. What has the process of learning to be an actor been like? Did you learn anything over the course of this film? What did you find it difficult? Did you find that it came easy? I'd love to hear from you guys about sort of how you guys are honing that part of your craft.
Well, for me, this was actually my very first audition, like my very first, like right off the bat, like my very first audition. And even Andrew didn't know that. Like I told him about it and he's like, whoa, like that's crazy. And so it was cool because I was like, oh my God, like this is like the very first thing that I'm doing. Like I have my foot in the door, like I'm right there. I feel like I learned a lot from Andrew. He has been a mentor for me, and I'm sure for everybody else. Just being like comfortable, like he told us, like he's like, be yourself, like be comfortable in front of the camera, like don't be intimidated by the camera, like the camera's not there, it's you, like you put yourself in the actor's shoes, and you become the actor ultimately. And I feel like that's what I learned a lot, and just being able to like grow as a family. And I love the cast and crew, like we all still stay in touch with each other as well. But it was a really great experience, like my very first time off the bat.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, Zareen and
Yeah.
Yeah, I can echo that. Pretty much the same thing, really. This was also my first movie, so I went into it very new and very like apprehensive about what it was going to be like. Andrew again helped a lot. Like he was a great director to work with. Like he mentioned, it was a very collaborative effort because things in the script that I felt like, oh, I feel like this should be a little bit different. I could just talk to him about it and we discussed it and we would change it to make it fit with what I thought would fit a little bit better. And it was stuff like that I didn't know if it was okay to do that. So just learning from him regarding what was it okay to do on set, what was it okay to feel on set, taking breaks when you need to, instead of just, like we were doing 16-hour days. And as a new actor, you kind of feel like I just have to keep going, but it's like you need to take your breaks, otherwise you will die. So just learning that process throughout all of that was it was a really good experience. Just we all got super close. Like Gerline said, we still keep in touch because I think for most of us, it was our first film. And because of that, we just relied on each other a lot. Yeah, it was like, it was really interesting because you have no idea what you're going into. It's so different from the audition room and so different from classes. And when there's actual stakes at hand, I found that it also just comes more naturally than when you're auditioning or when you're in classes, because when you're in the environment, when you're with the other actors who are playing the other characters, you do just become the character because you're in the world, you're in the circumstance, and you're not really acting anymore. You're just being the character. And I think that for me was the biggest thing, is it's just so different from classes. It happens more naturally.
Yeah, and I think I can relate to what Zareen and Gerline said too, just about the support that Andrew gave. He was very open with how we wanted to play around with the characters. But yeah, also at the end of the day, we did have to stick to the script. But the script, it didn't even feel like something like that we had to try to do. It just felt like we memorized the lines, and the lines just came out exactly as it was written on the script. So I think just because of the support and just everything that Andrew taught us, and just the indie film like making just scene, I think definitely propelled me to think about acting and just making films in a different perspective than I usually did, because I thought before it was supposed to be like the director's like the head, and he's gonna say, and what he says goes, and that's it. Like you have no choice. You have nothing to say about it. You just go and do the lines, and that's it. But Andrew just like made it such a welcoming and just an amazing space to create and work. Yeah.
Sounds very collaborative. That's really cool. We have another question from the audience. Allie would like to know if you could each speak to what you hope people take away from this project after seeing the film. Do you want to kick us off, Andrew?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I've spoken about this before, but I guess like if I were to whittle it down to something, it would probably be like embrace the experience that you have, regardless of where you're from and who you are, and whether you're marginalized or not. Like I think I want people to come out of it and feel like just be who you are. And this goes for like BIPOC creators too, right? Like tell your stories, tell your experience, regardless of whether or not you've ever seen it on TV. Don't try to mimic something that you're seeing. And I think that's why, I think Amara, you mentioned it kind of, it's a bit meta in that like, she's trying to mimic what she's seeing on TV. So my message in a way was like, don't mimic what you're seeing and just be who you are. Right. Like, and this goes beyond like just what we see on TV and movies, but like, don't try to be something you're not, like just be who you are. right? In every single sense of that phrase, right? So, but yeah, I think that's what I would probably want people to get out of it the most.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I like about it so much is it's not just, it felt to me like what was so interesting about the writing was it's not just about identity in the sense of racial identity that a lot of BIPOC films about representation are. It's about racial identity, but it's also about um, group identity in the sense that, you know, Rohit and Amit are grazing against this idea of thug identity, right? And then that conversation near the end between Trevor and Pooja as well um, felt like it's touching about on group versus individual identity in the sense that, you know, Trevor sounds like he's implying that he would have treated her differently if it weren't for how his friends imagined they should be engaging with a different group, right? So those are all the things that I really loved about it. And in that context, I want to talk about the ending a little bit as well, because I felt like the ending was very unexpected for me. You know, it didn't wrap up in the way that I thought it was going to, where it didn't feel like Pooja had very clear answers about, you know, what her identity was, who the people were that cared about her. And I think it's so amazing that the literal last line of the film is, it's always a race thing, you know, because it feels like such a radically honest um, way to end a film like that. And it feels like Pooja is just at a place now at the end of that film where she's starting to think about that question. So I would love to hear from you as well, Andrew, about sort of where did you want to leave the ending? Was it always your vision to leave it as you have it in the final film? Did it change at all?
Yeah, actually, yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because, like, I mean, that was probably one of the first lines I wrote for when I started the script. Like, I knew that I wanted the film to end with that line,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, I mean, that line, I mean, I mean, I'd love for people just interpret what it is, but you know, I think if for Pooja, it's that moment in a, you know, a minority teenager's life when their race really comes to the forefront of their mind, comes to their like their own consciousness, right? Where I think growing up as a kid, you just want to be who you are and just, you know, live your life the way who you want to be, and you know, you're figuring things out, but and you don't want to think about race. Like, these are things you don't want to think about, but there's things that happen throughout your life that force you to think about it, right? Like, you don't have a choice. And I think even the stuff that's happening right now, this whole anti-Asian hate movement, right? Like like I think for a long time the Asian community didn't want to talk about race, but it's so overtly in front of our face right now that you have no choice to think about it, right? Like, we can't walk outside our door without being forced to think about it. So I think it was in Pooja's life, that was the moment, that look on her face was like that moment where she realizes, I can't escape my race. Like, it's going to be a part of who I am. And I think, and it's a conversation, you know, amongst BIPOC, where it's like, we don't have a choice to think about the fact that we are a minority in this culture, right? Like, every day that we live, we're reminded in this country, in America, that we have to think about our race. It's a part of our identities. It's not something that we can just ignore, right? So I think for her character, it was that moment where she realizes that, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm glad that you brought that up as well, because in so many ways, I felt like the film was a catalog of all the different ways that were made to feel racialized. You know, because you approach it from so many different angles. Like, the national anthem scene is almost kind of such a benign scene, but I remember when I first came to Canada and they would make you get up every morning to sing the national anthem at school, I thought it was kind of weird. But you know, I don't think I've seen that in any other Canadian BIPOC film, right? So stuff like that was really great. And we're running out of time, but I want to sneak in a couple more questions here. Mohammed is asking about, can you talk a little bit about um, creating a 90s world. You know, you have fake movie posters and period appropriate music. Can you tell us a little bit about what maybe the challenges of putting that stuff together were?
Yeah, that was really fun. That was like a really fun part of this film, right? Like trying to make everything look as 90s authentic as possible. But I'd have to credit like my wardrobe designer, my costume designer Yannicka Tenbrook, and my production designer Kendra Legault. Like they were all like Yannicka grew up in the 90s, so that was very easy for her. But yeah, I mean, we did a lot of research, right? Like we had a lot of references, and funny enough, like for specifically the wardrobe, like a lot of that is actually my clothes in the film that I wore in the 90s, because being Asian, like my parents still have that stuff at their house, so I still had like, you know, closets full of my old clothes that I wore in the 90s. So I just literally just
my mom
took it.
yelled at my dad when he accidentally threw all my old clothes out.
Yeah, yeah,
definitely a thing.
So it finally came to use, right? Because I would always be like, what are you keeping this shit for? You know, like I'm like, so you know, now we had actual use for it. So I gave that all to Yannicka, and yeah, so that was all real stuff that we wore in the 90s. I guess that's why it helps in terms of like looking authentic, right?
Yeah.
Period detail was definitely spot on in the costume design, so that explains a thing or two.
Yeah.
I'd love it if we could also just wrap up by, we haven't heard from the cast in a while, extending to the cast the questions about both, you know, the ending and the essentially questions that the film raises about race, because I would argue that it posits questions more than answers, which is the right perspective, I think, to be approaching it from, and also what you feel the takeaway is, just to circle back, or what you hope the takeaway is for those that see the film. If you want to just chime in, Zareen, Gurleen, and Dalmika.
I think for me, the takeaway I hope that people get is that allow yourself the space to grow. We're not perfect people, and especially when we're teenagers, we're not perfect people. Pooja goes through this whole plot of understanding race and realizing that perhaps her mindset isn't the most productive for her own well-being, and that's how we all grew up. And I think a lot of people put a lot of pressure on themselves for being perfect all the time and knowing every single inkling about racial dynamics and things like that. And it's like, it's a constant learning curve. We're going to have to constantly keep learning about it and understanding what makes up those dynamics, what makes up those systems, and how to actively dismantle it. And unless we allow ourselves the space to grow and accept that maybe there's mistakes that we've made in the past, and maybe there's mistakes we're going to continue to make, and that's okay as long as we continue to learn and change that, then like that's the only way we're going to progress forward. And in terms of the takeaway at the end of the film, I completely chime in with resonate with what Andrew said, is that it is that point where Pooja realizes that race is an active factor in her life, because I think before that point, she was just living in denial that it was going to have any impact on her life at all, or that she was going to force it to not have an impact on her life at all. And I think we as a culture went through a period of trying to force that down people's throats, where it was like the idea of being color blind, and that's how we were going to move forward in solving racism, was just by being colorblind. And obviously that's not the case, because if you ignore the fact that people are racially diverse, then you're going to ignore all the problems that people who are racialized face. And the only way to move forward is by recognizing the problems that exist first. So for Pooja, I think that was definitely the beginning of her journey and understanding that there's a lot of work for her to do, and there's a lot for her to actually find out about how race affects her and how she's going to have to navigate life after knowing that.
Well said. Gurleen, do you want to feed in?
I definitely agree with what Zareen has said. For me, I want people to take away, like, for me, it was more about self-love as well, and just to embrace who you are, like Andrew said, and just like be original. Like don't try to mimic other people. Just be yourself. Because everybody is unique. Like there's no other person better than being yourself. And in the film as well, I know I was talking to Andrew at one point, and I kind of made Manpreet a backstory where she had her own identity issues, and she was more of like a lesbian in the film, I think that would kind of be like really cool. And because she also did deal with a lot of identity issues. And for me, it's just be yourself, be unique. And like Zareen said, give yourself the space to grow and just go from there.
Awesome. Tomika?
Yeah, and I can definitely relate to what Zareen, Gerline, and Andrew have said about, just loving yourself and, putting yourself forward first, actually. I think that is a major takeaway from this film. Just that made me realize that I needed to focus more on myself and figure out who I am to really, kind of like branch out into, what I wanted to do and like everything. It just came into so many ways. After I knew who I was, then everything else became like easier and like everything just like fit into place. So I think that's really interesting to see that, portrayed in a film like this. And to talk about the racial factor too, like, at the end, the ending scene was it was really like it made you think a lot, because it wasn't the ending that people expected, but it's the ending that people should be reminded of, I guess. Because I think Zareen looks into the distance and she sees these other two people. She sees this brown person first of all, and this brown guy, and she thinks like, oh, maybe like he could be the one. But then a white girl comes along and they're like together and stuff. So then I think that moment, I think that's so special because she starts to realize what is really going on. And I think for Amit too, Amit is very like submissive to Rohit, and we can clearly see that Rohit is the bigger brother or cousin in the sense, right? And he has more knowledge than everybody, I think, in the film, because he knows what's going on and he really recognizes like the racial injustice that's happening.
He's been through that part of his life.
Exactly. And that's why he got so violent, I think, and yeah, and I think the ending really speaks volumes.
I just want to sneak in one last question from Tala very quickly. In terms of the production, can each of you just very quickly talk about what was maybe the most challenging thing for you, whether it was a particular scene or a particular day or, as something that you had to do?
Yes. So the scene where Pooja's like running through the field looking for Trevor, it was like 40 degrees that day. And I was in like real jeans because, as Andrew said, like we had authentic 90s wear. It wasn't like lightweight, stretchy jean material and like 3 layers. And yeah, I had to run through that field for like 3 or 4 hours in the heat. And I thought I was going to die. Like at some point I was just like, you know what? I'm making a movie. If I drop dead, I drop dead. It's fine. But yeah, that was a hard day.
It was the car scene too. You said it was burnt. You were burning up in there, right?
As well. It was really hot in the car because there was no air conditioning in the car. I think it was broken or something like that. And me and Kumar, who plays Pooja's father, we were sweating. I think at one point in the movie you can actually see that our faces are just like glazed in sweat because it was boiling in there. Like a couple of the days, one of our second ADs, his whole job was to just bring us ice packs to make sure that we didn't pass out from the heat. So that was, I think, physically a challenge that I wasn't expecting from a movie of this caliber. Like I was like, yeah, it's like coming of age. Like I'm not gonna have to really physically exert myself. And then, it was like, no, you have to run through this field for like 3 or 4 hours.
With no jeggings.
Sorry?
With no jeggings.
With no jeggings in real jeans and Doc Martens, which are quite heavy. So yeah.
Gerline and Dolmika, do you guys have any sort of challenging memories?
So for me, it was the fight scene. The fight scene was the craziest because it was, again, the hottest day ever. I was in jeans. So like I had minimal movement. I got a lot of bruises on my legs after that. Like I wasn't hurt. Nobody was hurt in the making of the film, I promise. But I remember it was super hot and like I was always like on the ground and like just punching and everything, and it was super hot. And other than that,
It was a great scene.
fun.
You guys really sold it.
Thank you. Yeah, it was super fun. I know when I saw like my punch, I was like, whoa, like I scared myself. I was like, I can punch like that? Whoa. But other than that, it was really cool.
Yeah, echoing what, Zareen and Gerline said, it was really, really hot. So I think that constant, the constant struggle of, for the makeup team too, actually, they had to like powder us like every 5 seconds or something, right before every scene, but I think one particular part that was the hardest was this one line, and it is give me back my son. Yeah, that was the bane of my existence. That line just
line ever.
Yeah, it took him so long because
yeah.
he was just like, I don't get it, because apparently he'd like never seen the trailer of the movie, so he had no idea what the context to it was. So he was kind of like, I don't know what you want me to do. And I think Mika like went home and just like watched that scene like multiple times, and then he came back and he was like, yeah guys, I watched it, I still don't get it, but I watched it.
It was like, that was like in the 90s, that was a meme. That was like when Mel Gibson says, give me back my son, right? So I wanted him to say it exactly like Mel Gibson says it, but he just was like not getting the way it was said. So
yeah, Andrew was very particular about it. Like we spent so much longer on it than I thought we would. Like it was like the slightest intonation, Andrew was like, no, it's give me back my son, not give me back my son. Give me back
yes, exactly.
And I remember
he was literally practicing in the hallways.
I remember that day was like, because we were in a classroom as well, so there wasn't any AC, and so we had like ice packs like zipped up in our sweaters, in our pants. We're like, okay, we're ready.
So Andrew, why don't you just round it out, and why don't you tell us, especially as the director, what was kind of the most challenging thing of shooting this and putting it together?
I mean, there were so many challenges with this film, right? Like, and the actors are mostly immune to it because we hide a lot of the stuff. But like, we were kicked out of the school one day, and we had to basically sell ourselves back into the school to let us film, because if we didn't film that day, we would be just out entire scenes for the film, right? So like the person who was supervising for us at the school, they were, there's some things happened, and they just didn't want us to film there anymore for the day. They're like, you're done, right? So we had to negotiate our way back in. So that was one really stressful day. And just, money is always an issue, so like when, you don't have a lot of money, conditions aren't always perfect, so you're always putting out fires. So, just as, as somebody who produced it myself as well, with my other producers, like, I'm dealing with these problems like constantly, right? So yeah, there's an endless amount of stories.
Indie filmmaking.
I have to say, we're very glad that location challenges and Mel Gibson meme imbuing aside, you guys made this film. You surmounted all of those challenges, and it's a remarkable film. We're so thrilled that we were able to present it. We are coming up to time, so I think that's where we'll have to leave it. But I just want to say thank you so much to all of you for being here and for trusting us to present your work, and for all of the insight that you shared today. It was a really great discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye.